Good evening, everybody, and good morning to Boyd. Delighted to see you all here. As Julie said, these are a great opportunity to hear from some world-class industry leaders who are genuinely experts in the field, and that's so true of Boyd Multerer, who's a much valued honorary graduate and friend of the university. Boyd is responsible for Xbox Live, an extraordinary gaming and entertainment service, which is now used by millions of people worldwide. He founded and led that team that worked on Xbox One, went on to win a Technical Emmy and a Microsoft Technical Achievement Award. He was behind XNA programming, which allowed independent designers to develop games for the Xbox 360 console. He joined Microsoft in 1997 to work on web servers, and then founded the development team that went on to create Xbox Live, and it launched in 2002. By 2012, he was named as one of Game Developer Magazine's Power 50, a list of people who had stood out for their outstanding contributions to industry. After 20 years at Microsoft, Boyd left in 2014 to create Kry10 Industries, which is about building high security next generation platforms for IoT connected devices and cross-platform applications. He received an honorary doctorate in engineering from GCU in 2017. As an outstanding contribution to the gaming industry, and we're very delighted to welcome him here this evening, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. So over to you, Boyd.
Hey, thank you very much. Okay, so it is 6 o'clock in the morning, so I'd like to say good morning, everybody. I've got my coffee. I got out of bed maybe 40 minutes ago. In other words, I moved to New Zealand a few years ago, and we're going to talk about a couple things. I'm going to start with trying to connect, because I really like to go to Scotland, but I'm kind of far away right now, and there's no travel anyway. So let's try to find some connections between where I am and where you are, and then I'll tell you a little bit about me and a little bit about my career and maybe a little more about what I'm working on right now. And then we'll have a little conversation about COVID and what I think some of the implications are in the marketplace and the job marketplace and the technical world. So that's sort of my plan for today. I may have gone overboard on the connection part, so I'm going to go a little bit fast on that part. So let me share a little talk here. Oh, you can see from the window behind me, it's dark out. And that's because we're heading into fall. Yeah, that's right. Summer is over, we're heading into fall. Okay, so let's see here. Boom. Okay, I have a little deck. So welcome to the Captains of Industry talk. I try to be a little bit of a humble person, and I don't like big flowery things. And in New Zealand, that's especially not cool. So when I thought about the deck and the talk and the title of it, it's like, what does Captains of Industry mean? It seems more important than what I've done, even though I've done some stuff. So I don't know, let's just say it has something to do with boats. Okay, I'm in Wellington, New Zealand, and it's far away. And if you don't know Wellington, the first thing you think is, well, it's got the name Wellington, and I know there's a statue of Wellington in Glasgow. But is there any connection to Scotland? So I thought about it, and my oldest daughter, who is currently awake and about to head off to rowing practice, she goes to Scots College here in Wellington. And I wonder why it's called Scots. I'm not sure, but they do have a pipe band. They also have a rugby team that does hakas ahead of time. So there's definitely a multicultural thing going on here. Where is Wellington, New Zealand? I should probably find a map. So I literally went and took the most recent map that had come across my my screen. And this came across from the Civil Defense about a week ago after the big earthquake just north of here. And you can see that I am in that circle in the little safe zone. So that was kind of weird. Woke up at 2:30 in the morning and the house was shaking. And then I stayed up for a couple hours waiting to see if we had to evacuate, but we didn't. So another map. There's a joke here that says that when the Scots came to New Zealand, they landed in the north and just kept going south until the weather was so miserable that they could call it home. So there's a tremendous number of Scottish connections in Wellington. And then a lot of people just kept going down to Dunedin, which is so Edinburghish that, I don't know if that's the right word, it's modeled, the streets in Dunedin are actually modeled on the streets of Edinburgh. Okay, so let's zoom in on Wellington a little bit. That's where Scots College is. I'm calling you from right there. This peninsula is the Miramar Peninsula. And I don't know if you've ever watched a movie, but sometimes you see Miramar before the movie or after. That means it was made in that oval. You see like in the upper part of it where it says Weta Cave. It's not a cave, it's a workshop, and that's where they made all the costumes and the weapons and everything for the Lord of the Rings series, which was pretty much filmed here. Today, especially given the COVID situation, this is where the world's movies are being made. There are at least 24 big picture movies that are in production right now in that oval. Okay, my younger daughters go to school at Queen Margaret of Scotland College, which is in that circle. That's Parliament, that's where Jacinda, the Prime Minister, lives. And last one here, that's where Victoria University Wellington is. And I'd like to zoom in on that. So it's a close-up zoom into the college, which is right off of Glasgow Street. Okay, so now I'll start talking about me. I'm from the US. I was born and raised in Wisconsin, but I spent half my life in Seattle. And while I was there, I did some stuff. So let's go through the career briefly. Did some desktop publishing startup-y stuff for, I don't know, 7-8 years. There's a rule that I've tried to follow through my career, and that is try to predict where things are going. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be working on the things that are popular right now. You want to be working on the things that are going to be popular in a few years. So the first time I did that was that first transition. In the 90s, in the early 90s, everything was about desktop publishing. If you wanted to communicate to a team, you wanted to communicate to your neighborhood, whatever, you actually printed out a physical newsletter. So in 96, I had an opportunity to do some contract work with a tiny little new team at Microsoft that was building something called a web server. And once I saw that, I'm like, okay, this web server thing, which nobody uses yet, is going to kill desktop publishing. So I then set about to sell off that company to Adobe, and then took a job at Microsoft, and that's how I got into Microsoft. And that was a good move. So I wrote code that shipped in IIS, which was their web server in versions 3, 4, and 5, helped build some early data center software. And that directly led to the opportunity in Xbox. So that was about August 2000. And a friend of mine, a guy named Jay Allard, who ended up running all of Xbox, he had, how to put it, he's the guy who convinced Bill Gates into embracing open web protocols instead of going and building an America Online competitor with private networks. So after a whole bunch of stuff regarding web tech, he was burned out and he decided to leave Microsoft. And Bill and Steve basically said, all right, what would it take to get you to stay? And Jay said, you're not going to get me to stay. And if you did, you'd have to let me build a game console. So anyway, a couple months later, Jay asked me to come and join the new Xbox team. And that was August 2000. And literally the job description, the way it was pitched to me was, and I'm not kidding, it was this. It was, Jay says, after a lot of arguing, they decided to put an Ethernet port in the back of the box. This was extremely controversial because at the time, nobody had broadband, right? It wasn't the thing yet. Everyone was sitting on modems. A few people had ISDN lines, maybe 128K, but it wasn't in market. But again, following the rule of build to where the world's going instead of where it is, you could draw trend lines and you could see that in a few years, people would have broadband. So the bet was made to not put a modem in the Xbox and instead put an Ethernet port. So my job was not to make that decision that had already been made. So we made the decision to put the Ethernet port in. My job was to go figure out what it talked to. We had no idea what we were doing, right? Scale out data centers weren't a thing yet. There was still big iron in data centers. We knew we wanted to use inexpensive tech. I'd just come off that web project, so we knew we wanted to use scale out web servers. We knew we wanted SQL databases. We knew we had security issues. And then we were sort of making up what that would look like in the data center as we went. But we also did something really important, which was we went and talked to gamers. And the goal was, what are they trying to get out of a game console? And what are they trying to get out of a console? What would they try to get out of online? And there was this pivotal, focus group that we did. We actually flew up to New York for this. And we had 3 sets of people come through. The first set was all PC gamers. And they all said, well, the way I play is I go in my room, I turn off the lights, I put on my headphones, I find random people that I don't know online, and then I try to kill them. The game console people, they were in the next room, and it was all game console players, and they're like, yeah, that sounds awful. The way I play my games is I invite my friends over, we get some beer, we sit on the couch, and we play games together. There were different games and different sets of people, but beer was always part of it. Then the third group was half PC gamers, half console gamers, and they just fought with each other. So the lesson out of that could have been that putting Xbox Live on a game console was a bad idea because the people who buy consoles weren't interested. But instead, we twisted a little and asked them, okay, so you're playing with your friends now, but you're also about to graduate university. What happens then? Are you going to stay in the same city? And they all went, oh. And then at the same time, there was also a cue to the games team to go find something that was more like what the PC gamers wanted and get that on the Xbox, and that ended up being Halo. And then Xbox Live was about connecting the Halo players, but also connecting the sports players, and it worked. Okay, let's see. Ran that for 4 years, and then I did XNA, which became the developer program for Xbox. It was both an easy way to get non-professional gamers in and non-professional gamers in, but also a way to, it also became the brand that had the professional game developer kit. Okay, super brief story. I did like a tour of Canada where I went to game developer studios. I don't know why it was Canada, but it was. Started off at Ubisoft up in Montreal, and then came up to Toronto, and then ended up in Vancouver where EA has a bunch of offices. And what I thought I was going to ask them and learn about was how they run the studios, how much, what kind of bandwidth and the networks do they have, how do they move all the assets around. And instead, what I heard every place I stopped was dissatisfaction that everyone was just working on sequels, that there wasn't enough creativity, that there wasn't any room for small games. So that's where XNA was born, was detecting that there was a market for independent games and for small games and a desire to build them, combined with a beefier set of tools to make it easier to build those things. So again, figure out where the world's going. After XNA, a couple of years I can't really talk about because stuff that didn't get released. And then the last 4 years I ran operating system for Xbox One. So this is like everything from hardware vectors into the chips all the way up to the UI. There's pieces of it I'm extremely proud of. In particular, when you're on an Xbox and you hit the center button and you switch from the game to the UI and it's really fast and you can switch back to the game and everything keeps running, that kernel architecture is something I'm extremely proud of. The UI itself is not. And if you've used it, you know what I mean. Let's see, after that, Xbox One was a hellish thing to ship. And I was burned out, and I didn't know I was burned out. So I left, and it took like a year to recover. And then it took another year to figure out what I wanted to do. And now I'm running Kry10 Limited, and we'll talk a little about that. Okay, so let's reiterate. There's a set of lessons that I learned. Number one, know what trends are around you. And by trends, I mean, these are the things that you can't affect. If you can't affect it, it's something else. So things that are happening that are going to be there no matter what you do, those are the things that are either going to run you over or you can grab on and catch a ride, right? Like the broadband thing for Xbox Live, that was one of those. Two, you have to know what problems you're solving. What technical people tend to do is they come up with a cool technical idea and say, I want to build that. Let's go figure out let's go find some customers. You got to do it the other way around. You have to listen. You have to see what people actually want. You have to know what problem you're solving and let the tech come from that. That was like the focus group that we did for Live. Once you know what problems you're solving, you also have to know what problems you're creating. And this one's harder, and I'm even still working on getting good at this. Every time you build a solution to a problem, you are creating new problems. Every single time. And they may not be ones you expect. Hey, this Bitcoin thing sounds super cool, but it's also using tons of electricity and putting carbon in the atmosphere. The goal is that the problem you've solved is bigger than the problem you've created. And if it's the other way around, you have to really introspect and decide if you're doing the right thing or not. The final one is that I believe that corporate culture and team culture is more important than your strategy. Now, strategy is really important, and if you don't have a good strategy, you're not going to succeed. But when you think about Apple versus Google versus Facebook versus Amazon versus Microsoft, are we looking at companies where you're comparing their strategies against each other? They're competing on the strength of the strategies? Not really. What they're competing on is the strengths of their cultures. Because crises arrive, things change. How do you make decisions? How do you get on the same page? This is where one culture will be better at some things and other cultures will be better at others. In other words, if you're interviewing for a job at a company, it's a two-way interview. They're interviewing you, but you get to interview them. And one of the things that I would focus on is what is their culture, and make sure it's a culture that you want to be a part of, because that is important. Okay. So what am I doing now? So I moved to New Zealand and I created a company called Kry10 Limited. Kry10, let's see. So let's start with the name. KRY is commonly used in military, in intelligence, in encryption circles for projects that have to do with secrecy, that have to do with safety, and have to do with security. The 1 and the 0, I'm pronouncing it as 10, but frankly, it could be the number 2 in binary, and I like that ambiguity. Either way, it says it's nerdy as heck, right? This is not a consumer-facing brand. Now, Kry10 overall, I've had people ask me if this is a reference to the character Kry10 from the show Red Dwarf, and I say, I will neither confirm nor deny that. But did you know that Kry10 from Red Dwarf is in turn named after the movie The Amazing Mr. Kry10, which was made in the 1950s, spelled differently. And in that movie, it covers like some kind of UK family from like 1910, just before World War I. And Mr. Kry10 is the butler, and he's definitely treated like a servant in the beginning of the movie. Then they go on vacation, they get stranded on an island in the South Pacific. Everyone's going to die. He saves everybody's life. And at the end of the movie, he's a peer to the family. So the theme of both the character in Red Dwarf and the character from the movie, and part of the culture I'm trying to build, is that our mission is to make everybody else's life better. In return, we're going to become better. And if you think about the arc of both characters, that's what happened throughout the shows. I can go on about that. The birds are cool. I don't need to say much more about how cool they are. Okay, so what am I actually doing? The main thing I'm doing is I'm building a new operating system almost from scratch. This is insane, and I don't recommend people try to do it, and I kind of question if I should be doing it sometimes. But I've been at it for 5 years now, and it's actually starting to work. So the problems I'm solving is, number one, if you're going to build a new OS and you're going to aim it at IoT, please make it secure upfront. That's number one. It doesn't mean it's perfectly secure, but it needs to be fundamentally more secure. Number two, it needs to be robust. This is machines that are going into places where they're doing infrastructure, they're doing critical jobs. They need to be able to self-heal in the face of an error. Think of it as security is about keeping your machine running in the face of intentional errors that are injected. Robustness is about keeping running in the face of unintentional errors, programming errors, bugs, malformed data, that kind of thing. Here's some more words. These words describe what I'm trying to do, and each of these words has a problem statement behind it. and I'm not going to go into them. Just an example of the way you think about how you're building something, and that you actually have to write problem statements. It has a logical architecture. I'm building on top of what's called a microkernel. So this is about as technical as we're going to get. It's a microkernel based operating system. It's got multiple apps on it. They're all peers to each other. And the idea is, in security terms, is to prevent lateral migration of attacks. So if one application becomes compromised, it doesn't take the whole computer down. You don't blue screen, and the attacker can't easily go from one app to the next. All right, rather than talk about it, I'm just going to show. Let's do a little bit of show and tell. Let me get this up. You, by the way, are the first people to see this running. Okay. So what you're about to see is, this is a Linux VM. It is running, I'm about to start a QEMU virtual machine, which is simulating something that's similar power to like a BeagleBone or a high-end Raspberry. So not a super powerful computer. This QEMU emulator is running in a Linux instance, which is running in a Parallels virtual machine, which is running on my 2012 MacBook Pro. In other words, yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's not the fastest machine to begin with. It sounds like I'm trying to make an excuse for how slow it's going to be, but I'm actually really pleased with how fast it is. So let's start it. Okay, QEMU's done. The OS is started. The Erlang Beam is running. It's got an IP address. A couple of errors for pieces I haven't built yet, and the web browser is up. And that was a cold boot from nothing. So I enjoy that, so I'm going to do it again. Let's see. So there's a lot going on here. And maybe the most important thing here is you're seeing a brand new OS booting from scratch, and those don't come around very often. And I can show, I'll bring up a Firefox window, and I'll hit the web server. Nothing's cached, so it has to bring things in. And it just serves some pages. And I can open up a WebSocket to it, bring up the live dashboard. And there you go. Okay, let's cancel that one. Stop that share. Another little quick demo here. I'll do the entire desktop this time, which is never a good idea. Okay. What do you guys see? I'm not sure I shared the right thing. Let me stop it. Share again. Desktop one. Yeah, okay. Okay, so what you're looking at now, I don't know if you can see yourself, so put that over here. Okay, so this is a set of code that is intended to run on the OS that I just showed you, but I ran out of time. I didn't get it all integrated before today. I'm giving another talk an hour after this one, where I'm going to be showing this to another audience. So you guys get to see it first. So over here is, this command line is running a virtual device. This one is running a web service, which will become a cloud service. And this is a web page that's hitting that same cloud service. I spin up the device. It starts up. I'll just put this aside. This is work in progress over here. It created a connection to the web server. And you can see that the device showed up on the page. And when I click it, I have the device's UI. This is really important. That is not HTML that's coming down. One of the problems in the current way people do it, so again, important to identify the problem, is when you're controlling a device remotely, what everyone does today is you have the device and it talks to a web server and it gets its config data. And then you have web browsers that talk to the web server and run some web UI. And that works. It works just fine. But 5 years from now or 10 years from now, if this is, let's say, a truck that's kitted out with £500,000 worth of equipment, is it still going to run 10 years from now when the company that made it got bought or they went out of business? And who knows if that server's still being run? right? So never trust a device if you don't know where it keeps its brain. In this case, the brain is entirely running over here. The UI is actually running over here, and it is projecting scripts of drawing commands that get rendered in the web browser. So the browser doesn't know anything about what you see in these buttons and everything. It is literally just drawing and collecting input and passing it back. And yet I end up with a completely usable UI, which is entirely being run on the device itself. So now I don't have versioning problems. I've got the old version of my truck and I got a new version of the truck. And when I connect the different trucks, I get the correct UI for it automatically. This crash button is interesting. I'm using Erlang as my main application VM. And one of the problems it solves is robustness. And this would be an unintentional error. When I hit this button, it's going to cause an unhandled error to happen over in this window. And the question is to see how quickly it recovers and gets back in a working state. So, okay, and I'm up. I just crashed the device. And it generally tends to happen, recover faster than the screen's refresh rate. Last bit here is I've got some gaming background, so I'm using transforms to do all the placements and everything, which means I can do things like this and have everything work. Okay, that was a little show and tell. Where did I put the deck? Deck is over here. Let's share that out. Okay. All right. Let's talk about COVID. Now, before I talk about COVID, let's start with a confession. Let's start with an admission. I'm sitting here in New Zealand. All right. So when COVID hit, the whole country went into a 7-week-long, really serious lockdown. Like everybody in the entire country, 5 million people stayed home. And if I went out to walk the dogs and there was someone else walking their dogs on the street coming the other way, one of us would cross to the other side, right? Our bubbles were serious, they were enforced, and they lasted for 7 weeks. And at the end of it, there were no cases, which has been maintained. So here's a little confession piece. I took this picture at the open market a couple weeks ago. That's sort of life here. I was going to put in a picture of my daughter's dance performance from November, but I didn't want to show off. Think crowded theater. All right, now let's a little bit more reality for the rest of the world. This is a picture of Microsoft's main campus. Those X buildings that you see are god-awful things. I've worked in them. And you get turned around and lost. And they're all being knocked down. This is in this picture here, you can see that there's a lot of construction going on, but the goal is they're tearing down the entire old campus and replacing it with something like this. This is the rendering of what they want to do. And the original plan was big open office spaces, lots of these buildings. The center courtyard here, where you see the fields, is over what would become the world's largest underground parking lot. The current world's largest underground parking lot is just across the street out of the picture. And that's in the center of the buildings where the Xbox team is. I used to park in that parking lot. It's been scrapped. All right, where did they get to? This is where it's at. It's an empty construction field. There's cranes everywhere and no one shows up. The largest underground parking lot looks like this. All right, so COVID has affected everybody. Well, not everybody in New Zealand necessarily, but certainly everybody that I talked to outside of New Zealand. Lots of companies have gone into survival mode. Quite a few have failed. But importantly, quite a few have discovered something that they weren't expecting. Microsoft and Google, and I've got friends who are at all these companies. No one's coming into the offices. Everybody's working remotely. Some of these companies have shut down the buildings. Google has shut off power to some of their buildings. There's no cleaning staff. There's no cooking staff. They don't have to maintain these things. And to their surprise, when everybody is on a video call, oh, let me back up a sentence. Before COVID, we would be in these meetings where you got, say, 5 people in a room and 5 people on a video call. They don't work, right? The people who are on the call might as well not be there because the people in the room just talk to each other. But funny thing, when everybody's on the call, it does work. When everybody's on the call, you can have conversations and you can have hand raising and you can have questions. And what these companies have discovered is that productivity hasn't really dropped. The thing that did drop was the cost and the expense of maintaining these buildings. Right? These buildings are not going to reopen. And if they do, they're not going to reopen in the same way. The plans I just showed you are all up in the air right now. I think Microsoft has canceled the dig for that parking lot. And the offices they do put in will not be open spaces. They will have doors that can close because they've realized that distancing is important, even for flu, even in a post-COVID world. They've realized that they don't have to pay people to be in these buildings. And I think the new model is people will come in maybe 2 days a week and work from home 3. Okay, this is a massive, massive change. Some of these companies are saving like $100 million or more a month on not running these buildings. There's no way they're opening them up again. So this is one of those trends that it's kind of hard to put your finger on exactly what it means. But we know that as vaccinations happen, companies will become less paranoid. As they become less paranoid, the hiring will start up again, but it will look different and place will matter less. I've also heard that places like Microsoft are thinking hard about opening buildings in states where they don't really have a presence and in countries where they don't necessarily have a presence. Because why the heck would you pay a premium to put someplace put somebody in a city with a high cost of living when you don't have to? These are things that are happening. I'm discovering that my team right here in New Zealand, where I can walk around without a mask, isn't here. I've got an engineer in Sydney. I've got people up at Auckland. I've got another guy here in Wellington. I see the guy in Wellington once a week. This is how it is. I actually want this to be a note of hope because we are going to turn the corner with the vaccines, but it's also a note of change. And it's one of those opportunities to figure out how that change will affect you. So I'm going to wrap up and take some questions. As I was doing this slide, I realized, here's a problem that's out there. How do you put your email address on a slide that's on a talk that might be recorded and then shown to the world later? And I don't want the spam bots destroying my email box. So you don't put your email in. I put my Twitter handle on, I'll put it in my website, it's got a contact page, but there's a general problem here of how come there isn't a service that I can drop in easily that gives a certain amount of, I don't know if it's proof of work or some kind of other barrier to sending a message. There's curation involved where if you're sending constant spams, you get banned from it. It's a thing I could sign up to that I could get messages and from people that I'm trying to reach out to in a public manner without destroying my inbox. Anyway, that hit me like last night, so I added it to the end.
Thanks for the great talk, Boyd. Thank
Thanks.
you, and I'm sure our attendees today have found it very useful. We'll now move on to the Q&A session, and I'll go to some of the pre-submitted questions first, but if you would like to submit a question, you can do so either by using the chat functionality or by using the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen and the participants icon. So the first question comes from one of our graduates, John Neil Rice, and he's asking, what do you view as the next big innovation in online gaming architecture?
What's the next big innovation in online gaming architecture? I'll tell you what my gut says. My gut says that this isn't where we're going to see the next big innovation. I think that online gaming architectures are fairly well understood right now. Now, maybe gaming mechanics could change a lot, and that's a game design issue, so I'm not representing that. But the way packets are going around, the way you stream, the way you already mark, this packet needs to be delivered, this packet is nice to have, the way you're already thinking about Dead Reckoning and racing games and that kind of thing. I don't see a lot of change happening in those architectures. I do see change happening in game design around online. Oh, wait, yes. Okay, I bought myself enough time to come up with an actual answer. Actual answer, SpaceX. If you're familiar with the company SpaceX, they are launching satellites like crazy right now. And this is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. They're building what's called the Starlink constellation, which in the US, they're authorized to send up, I think currently they're authorized up to 14,500 satellites in low Earth orbit. This is many times the grand total of satellites that have ever been launched. And when they send a rocket up, they send 60 up at a time. And like another 60 went up just a couple days ago. So low Earth orbit, satellite communications in the past have largely failed because in geosync, it's like 350 milliseconds up, 350 down. You're talking almost a second of latency. That wrecks gaming. Low Earth orbit, we're talking 7 milliseconds up and down. And then the horizontal link is in space. So that is speed of light in space is faster than the speed of light in glass. So you've got a straighter line and a faster speed of light. So latency is actually going to be, I think, pretty well comparable to terrestrial communications. What this means, if you're building a game, is that there's regions of the world that just got a lot closer. And there are markets that have currently not been addressable that are. Right? If you can have anywhere from 100 to a gigabit up down out in the middle of nowhere, that does make you think about who your audience is and who you're actually trying to sell to. Okay.
Great, thanks for that. On to the next question. There's actually been quite a few questions submitted on this one. And it's asking what advice you would give to someone who's just starting in the gaming industry or trying to break into it.
When it comes to what kind of advice is someone who's trying to get into the gaming industry, it's the same advice for any industry. You have to sit down and ask, why do you want to do this to yourself? It's a fun industry. If you're successful with it, you can make a lot of money. It's a hard industry to be successful. The work hours are long. There's a lot of burnout from it. But if you love it, then you already know why you're doing it. Right? It's because it's something you're really into, and expect that you're going to work really hard and expect that it has become a machine to crank out games. On the other hand, there's the indie markets. Those are still developing. The phone markets. We were actually right when we predicted with XNA that there was a market for small games. We were just wrong that it was going to be on consoles. The phones came along, and that's where those games landed. So I guess my advice to someone who wants to get in games is to really stop and ask yourself why you want to do this and what kind of games you want to work on. And then work on your portfolio. So don't get yourself into the wrong company working on a game that you're not actually excited about, because it is going to grind you down with the number of hours you're going to have to put in. So make sure it's something you really want to do and that it fits your larger career progression.
Okay,
otherwise, I can't get more detailed than that without actually sitting and having a conversation with you.
I'm sure a lot of people would take you up on that. But we'll just go on to the next question. Just a reminder that you can still submit any questions in the live chat. So please do so if you wish. So the next question comes from one of our students, and they're asking if you have ever experienced stagnation when it came to being creative and innovative, and if so, how did you overcome it?
Yes. Time. Look, the entire year of 2015 was a waste. This is related to the burnout question. It's related to, I don't know if I should say mental health, but that's probably a part of it. You have to be centered. You have to be internally happy. You have to have good sleep. You have to have been fed, and you have to not be stressed out of your mind. And that's when I find that the creativity really works. So if you find yourself in a job or in a position where you're supposed to be creative, but how to put it, burnout happens when you have responsibilities for things that you have no control over. Watch for that sort of situation, because if you find yourself in that situation, you are not going to be able to be as creative as you want to be. So make sure you're in a situation where if you are responsible for doing something, you actually have the tools you need, and you actually have the ability to do something about it. Because if you don't, that's when you will hit your bottom. And I've got stories I could tell about how much fun it was to ship Xbox One, but we're not gonna go into that.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is probably quite relevant in terms of the current situation with the pandemic. Clara, who's a graduate of ours, is asking, what would you recommend for any recent graduate experiencing unemployment in your industry in these times, and what are some of the things that the graduates can do, you know, so they don't have the big gap in their CV employment history?
Sure. This is not the first time I've heard this question. I just got off the phone with a young programmer in Poland. Exact same thing. Right. So my first thing I would say is, you are not alone in this. Everybody is in this, and graduates everywhere are going through the exact same thing, except maybe in New Zealand. Right. So it feels weird to say, but everywhere else, I've heard this story from everybody everywhere else. So A, you're not alone in this. B, it's temporary. So if it is temporary and we know it's going to end and you can see the end coming, the question is, how do you position yourself so that you rise up a little bit and you're in a stronger position when things start to open up again, and they will open up again. So I would say, number one, forget about location, because it doesn't matter anymore, right? You are going to be applying to things that may not be in Scotland, that may not be in the UK, that may not be in Europe, and it doesn't matter. So, and you don't even need visas. That's the weird thing of it. This telecommunication thing means you don't need a visa to take a job for a company in the US, right? If you can be remote, you can be remote. And there's a whole industry that's popping up now about having employees that are in countries that you aren't. There's companies that do, like I've got my guy in Sydney. I don't want to learn how Sydney employment tax works. I don't want to learn how superannuation works. And yet I'm going to have people there because there's this locus of engineers that know SEL4 there. So there's a company that I just give them the money, and they've got offices in Australia, and they know what all the tax law is, and they know how all the superannuation works, and they just make it happen. If I were to hire someone in the UK, I would go to the same people, because I don't want to set up an office in the other country, but it means I can hire people anywhere. And this is one of those changes that's happening. So stop trying to apply local. Your employment market is now global. I would say a little bit of time zone restriction, right? If it's 12 hours off, it's actually going to be kind of hard. But your employment options now are plus or minus 6 time zones. Right. And then think hard about what's your portfolio look like, because when it is time to apply, have something flashy that you can show that you did or that you built. If you're sitting there with downtime, don't waste it. Go build, and you're not alone.
Great, thanks. I think that just answered Connor's question, which Connor just put in the chat, about advice for trying to stand out with your portfolio or in interviews.
Well, yeah, let's address that quickly. Hard for me to answer because it depends what your thing is. If you're an artist, obviously it's art. If you're a coder, it's going to be, what did you build? And show me some code that's working. Here's an open question I don't have a good answer to. How do you interview people in this world? I don't know that the old way of doing technical interviews worked, because I mean, I was brought up in a world where, yeah, we would do coding interviews on whiteboards. And I look back and I would say it was moderately successful. It weeded out the people who couldn't code at all, but I also think it also weeded out people who were really good coders but didn't perform well on the spot. In a world where it's in a video call, how do we do it? And I think the world is learning how to do these interviews. So nobody knows. The answer to your question is nobody actually knows the answer to it, but we know it's there. So this is one of those trends that is affecting everybody. And you get to start and think about it. You're going to be in an interview. It's going to be remote. What do you want to tell the person on the other end about what you've done and what you see? If you're a coder, it might be an open source thing. It might not be an open source thing, but it's probably something you built. And it's probably at least something you can demonstrate, like I just did with you guys.
Okay, perfect. And I think we have time for one last question. And it's asking if there's a specific one defining moment or event in your life that made you end up where you are just now.
Well, it's probably a small series of moments, right? One was leaving Microsoft because I had to get out and I had to reset. Two was kids. And there was a moment when, you know, you come across these moments where things are changing. And sometimes it's external change, sometimes it's internal change. And it's about 2016, and I'm talking to my wife, Kry, and we're like, you know, okay, I'm going to go try to build an OS, and this is stupid, and this is insane. And it's going to take 5 years. And where are we going to do it? Right? If you stay in Bellevue, the cost of living it might be too high, and I don't know that we can pull it off. So we might need to move. Right. This is a big decision, by the way. You're going to pick your family up and move your kids who are about to go into high school, partly because you want to go build something and you need to lower your cost of living, partly because, frankly, I think one of the problems in the US is that people don't get out and they don't have experience in the rest of the world. And so everything seems foreign, right? And we didn't want to be those parents. So it felt like one of those opportunities to say, let's take a look around the world and see where we want to be. And then we had this long conversation about what are the things that we value in a place to live. And it included all kinds of stuff like healthcare, school systems, currency stability. We got corruption statistics on government. We got traffic statistics. We got weather statistics. And then my wife, who's been studying data science more in biology, she built a model and we got as good a normalized data as we possibly could, about 80 cities around the world, including Glasgow. And then as much data as we could. She crunched the numbers, and much to our surprise, Wellington came out #1. Wellington, Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, and Stockholm were in the top 5. Interesting trend there, that 4 of the top 5 were in this part of the world. I'm going to say that Wellington's a really good fit for us. I will now admit, wind wasn't in the model, and this is one heck of a windy city. Right, it blows like stink here. And during the winter, when it rains, it doesn't rain all the time, but when it does rain, the rain hits you sideways. Right. So how did I get to where I am now? Well, 1 was being stubborn. 2 was by looking at trends and looking at problems and trying to decide what problem I want to solve. 3 was looking at my personal situation and deciding, well, what's best for my kids? What's best for us? Where do we want to be in the world? What kind of impact do we want to have in the world? And it all added up to a big mess of things that I don't know how you solve it. So we kind of made up a model, and then it's slightly better than throwing a dart at a board, but it did work, and here we are.
Some really, really great advice there, Boyd. Thank you so much. I'll wrap up the Q&A now and hand over to back to Professor Mike Mannion to close the event.
Okay.
Oh, Boyd, that was great. Loved it. Pity I don't have time to ask my questions, but that's the way things are. Well, I'll have to invite you back to talk to some of the guys back in the office. Fantastic.
Hey, on that point,
yeah,
this is now video is cool. You guys want me back next week? I'm back.
Perfect. Yeah. No,
Anytime you just ask. I'm
really
serious.
like
Just
to
ask.
get into some of the tech stuff. Actually, really interesting for me anyway. But that's different story. Quite interested in that stuff. And yeah, really great talk and presented with your usual infectious enthusiasm, which always goes down well, and particularly laudable given that the time of the morning it is over there, and you've only just had your first cup of coffee. So hats off.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got another call on the coming up. So congratulations. So yeah, we'll invite you back because I think you've got an awful lot to contribute, and we're fascinated to hear what you say. I think, and thanks very much for the advice to students and graduates. It's always great to hear different perspectives. You know, different people follow different career paths, and it's fascinating to hear some of the decisions that people take. And when it comes off, it's great, a great story. So yeah, I'm very pleased for you and your family that you've managed to settle into a brand new country and a new life, which is a tough gig, you know, and you've done it really well. So congratulations to you, and thanks very much. And I think everybody, I think in Zoom, if you're all still on the call, I think you can put your hands together formally in Zoom and give Boyd a big round of applause. Okay, that's terrific. And other than that, thanks very much everybody for being on the call, and I hope to see you again at some point in the future. But have a good day.
I hope to see you guys too.
Yeah, okay.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.